Hello, and welcome to the Neurology Nuts and Bolts podcast, a podcast all about constructing your career in neurology. I'm your host, Harry Sutherland, and I'm an epileptologist at the Yale School of Medicine. Today, as part of the Career Development Series, we are going to be talking about getting involved in national organizations as a medical educator with three expert guests, Drs. Jaffar Khan, Schuyler, and Jeff Dewey. Jaffar Khan is joining from the Emory School of Medicine, where he is a full professor and serving as the director of the general and vestibular neurology programs, in addition to chair of the Department of Neurology. Welcome, Jaffar.
Thank you.
Schuyler is joining from the University of Connecticut, where she is an associate professor serving as the neurology residency program director and associate chief of education at Hartford Hospital. Welcome, Erica.
Thank you.
And Jeff Dewey is joining from the Yale School of Medicine, where he is an assistant professor serving as the Neurology Residency Associate Program Director and Director of the Neurology Clerkships. Welcome, Jeff.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right. So each of you has been highly involved in various national organizations. And before getting into the various groups out there, I thought it might be worth first providing a basic outline of the various types of work that medical educators may be involved with, and then we can talk about how these different organizations can fill some of those different niches. So I conceptualize 5 different but not mutually exclusive roles, with the first being the more obvious role of teacher or mentor. Medical educators may also have more formal administrative positions. They may design curricula, they may attend to assessment and evaluation, and they may also pursue scholarship. So I wanted to start our conversation today with that administrator role, and all of our listeners will be at least somewhat familiar with the work of the ACGME, and all 3 of our guests have been highly involved in that organization. And one of the more consequential jobs of the ACGME is to provide accreditation for residency and fellowship training programs. Jaffar, since you were the chair of the review committee, or the RC, would you like to give a broad overview of what the ACGME generally does and what the RC committee specifically does?
Happy to. First of all, thanks again for having me here. This is quite a pleasure. So the ACGME, or the Accreditation Council for GME, as it's known, in short, oversees the accreditation of residencies and fellowships in the United States. It does this by setting parameters, requirements, expectations, and then monitors compliance with those expectations for educational standards for all residencies and fellowships. The purpose is to prepare physicians to deliver safe, high-quality medical care. The core way that the ACGME provides this function of oversight and accreditation is through its review committee structure. There are 28 medical specialties that are recognized. Each one has its own residency review committee, and the same is true for neurology. So through a committee of experts by experience and by training, physicians, residents, fellows, and even a non-physician public member come together to provide oversight of activities that are performed at a residency level and fellowship level.
And what did your role as chair of the RC look like? What kind of things did you do?
So I may as well go back to the beginning. The beginning is being nominated and then selected by the committee for membership on the committee. The membership on the committee consists of typically 3 terms, 3 2-year terms for a total of 6. And through the process of participation, one may be selected to be either a vice chair and or the chair of the committee based upon the vote of the committee again at that time. So from my purview as a member, I was involved in reviewing a subset of programs that came due annually for review and feedback to the program. The process was review the annual report produced by individual program and then present that program to the committee at large. Discussion ensued, debate, deliberation about successes, and then finally conclusion about accreditation status. From the purview of a chair, the opportunity to look at programs more widely, number one, also assist in the reviews of programs by other committee members, especially the newer committee members, and then to interact with the executive committee or executive director, the ACGME staff, if you will, on the organization of meeting structure, the organization of reviews, and then also bringing in speakers for the committee to extend their knowledge of ACGME activities in the context of accreditation.
Okay. And I also wanted to bring in Erica and Jeff here because both of you have also been members of the RC. So just going clockwise around my board of people I can see on the call. Erica, do you want to chime in first with your experience?
Sure. I think I'm going into my fourth year on the committee out of the 6-year term. And it's been very interesting. I think I wasn't really sure how the reviews would work. I certainly knew as a residency program director what it looked like to have my faculty complete the ACGME survey and the residents complete the ACGME survey. And then every year as programs, we complete our annual update and submit a lot of information about our faculty, our scholarly activity, our policies, our methods of evaluation, and a lot of different aspects of the program to show how we are compliant with the ACGME program requirements. Being on the reviewing side is very different. I think receiving a whole bunch of programs a couple times a year in preparation for our committee meetings, it gives you really the opportunity to learn a lot about other programs. So part of what we do are look at new program applications. So there may be a new residency program that's looking to start. It may be a new fellowship. It may be that, for example, a neurocritical care fellowship who has had UCNS accreditation is now applying for ACGME accreditation. And so we really do a deep dive as reviewers into the program, look at their faculty, look at their block schedule, and really go through it in great detail. And really being on sort of that reviewer, sort of regulatory side of things, I think it's a bit tedious, at least to learn it. But I do think it's rewarding. We're given the opportunity. So if a program is not compliant with all of the program requirements, we can make suggestions either in the form of areas for improvement or citations. And citations really are ways that programs can kind of have some meat behind their requests for additional resources. And it's really with the idea, at least from the reviewer's perspective, that we really want to help programs. We want programs to succeed. We want the standard for training in neurology to be very high. And I think it is. The other area that I think was really interesting to me and rewarding was when I had the opportunity to participate in doing a revision of subspecialty specific program requirements. Now, I'm an epileptologist. It was the time for sort of the next round of revisions to the program requirements for epilepsy fellowships and getting input from the organizations, the subspecialty organizations, as well as a public comment period, and then sort of incorporating that into making some revisions to our program requirements. I thought, first of all, it was really interesting to learn about the process for how to do that. But secondly, to kind of have input into what does an epileptologist really need to do as part of their fellowship training, what's important. And that part of it, I found really rewarding and gratifying to kind of help take input from all those different groups and kind of put together the next set of requirements.
Jeff, I know that you got involved even starting as a resident member before continuing on. So what has your experience been in terms of expectations you came in with and what you wound up taking away from your experience?
Yeah, I will say that I don't think I'm exaggerating. I think this was a transformational experience for me as a medical educator. So, as Jaffar alluded to, their committee is made up primarily of current and former program directors, but there are a few additional members on every RC. And one is a resident member, and then there's a public member. And while I was on the committee, there was also a PA member. And I was fortunate enough to just kind of apply sort of on a whim. My mentor said, "Hey, this looks like a cool opportunity for you." I was a PGY early PGY4 at the time. And I applied and was selected. And so I served a 2-year term as the resident member. And basically, you are a functional member of the committee. So you don't review quite as many programs as the faculty members, but you do review programs with a faculty pair. You present them, you give your own opinion, you're a voting member of the committee. And it was such a tremendous opportunity to see how accreditation works, what's being thought about at the administrative level by program directors, and also just kind of to see the inner workings of the ACGME, which to a lot of residents is a large but somewhat shadowy organization. And the thing I came away with is, first of all, I think the ACGME is very insightful to have residents involved. And so residents do have a voice in how their own training is carried out. But also for me, it was a launchpad to many other experiences. And I think we'll get to some of those later. But all resident members serve on a separate committee called the CRCR. So you go to 2 extra meetings a year with all the other resident members. And so you have a separate area to meet other medical educators and then to collaborate on projects sponsored by the ACGME. So out of my time on the CRCR came the Back to Bedside initiative, which I'm still involved in, 8 years down the road. And then that has provided many other connections to other national opportunities. So I think it's just a lesson as to how taking a chance and taking a little bit of initiative as a junior medical educator can lead to a lot down the road.
You all have touched on some of the things that you anticipated coming into the role, some other things that you learned to appreciate about the RC through your service on the committee. Would you mind just speaking a little bit more to how did you decide to get involved, and was that a conscious choice? Was it an invitation? How did that happen for you?
For me, I think it was something I had thought about. I've been a residency program director for a long time. And when a position opened up, I guess it was 4 or 5 years ago now, when the application process started, I really felt like I was ready to do that job. I felt like I had the experience in terms of how programs work, what we do from a program director side. And I also had a lot of ideas about how things can run smoothly. And in terms of being on the committee, I think it's important that, because a lot of the members are program directors, that we're human beings. We understand the issues and the concerns that programs have because we live it every day. That's what, that's our day-to-day position. So I think it's important to have people on the committee that are reasonable and are going to really understand where programs are coming from, be thoughtful and considerate in terms of sort of doing the administrative part of a program that's having some issues or some troubles meeting the requirements. And I think the committee really is made up of some very considerate and thoughtful human beings that are really at the heart of things, wanting programs to succeed and wanting, like I said, the sort of the standard of training in neurology to be really high. So I feel like I could do a part in contributing to that.
So I'll echo what Erica said about being ready and feeling ready. So I had been a program director for the neurology residency program at Emory and also the clinical neurophysiology fellowship director. And from the side of a program director, I learned a lot about what it took to keep the program aligned and compliant with the ACGME program requirements. What I didn't know was what was on the other side. And I felt like my knowledge and experience could contribute and had me ready to be on that other side. One of the major takeaways I received from my experience actually was understanding that the ACGME was actually there to benefit programs and to help me as a program director and all of our program directors leverage the environment they're in order to provide the highest quality education that's possible.
I think from my perspective, I was definitely not, I didn't know what I was doing, right, when I showed up. And Jaffar was there. I mean, I think the mentorship and onboarding was very thorough, and that was helpful, but that's part of it, right? And I think the lesson for me early on was that opportunities in education go to those who show up and take the initiative. And sometimes you just have to take a risk and learn on the fly. And I think we do that a lot in other settings as educators and clinicians, and this is no different.
So, Jeff, that's probably a good segue and transition because you mentioned opportunities come to those who do well in their prior opportunities and how engagement can beget further engagement. I know this is a larger theme that I'm sure all three of you can speak to, but I know one that I wanted to touch on was the milestones because that's a relatively visible effort by the ACGME. Jeff, you were on the Milestones 2.0 committee and the first author on the paper that introduced us to that iteration of the milestones. So would you be able to tell us about some of that, the work groups that you've otherwise been on at the ACGME, and kind of how that theme of doing work begets more opportunities has played out for you? And then I'd like to hear Jaffar and Erica's reflections on how things can snowball from your engagement or participation in an organization.
Yeah, I think I'll be curious what Jaffar and Erica think, but in their experience. But I think to me, being involved nationally in education has felt a lot of like right place at the right time kind of things. And it's not unique to me. Whoever was in my position could have done it, but I happened to be on the RC when the first major revision of the milestones was being launched. And so they were looking for a junior member on the committee. I was finishing fellowship at the time, but they felt that I was junior enough and invited me to join. And it was a multi-year process with some of the experts in neurology education. And I just felt so fortunate to be on it. But at the same time, I think I owe that to a system that really respects trainees and junior educators' opinions as unique and valuable. And so to me, it was very much a right place, right time. But I also feel that that's crucial in developing your career, is giving yourself those opportunities by taking a risk and taking initiative.
Erica, maybe I'll come to you next for your thoughts.
Or just thinking back, my first 5 years or so as a program director, I was also a new faculty at the time. I started being a program director pretty early in my career as a neurologist. And my first few years of doing that were really challenging. And a big source of support for me was the Consortium of Neurology Program Directors through the AAN. And I went to those meetings religiously, and really tried to get as much out of it as I could, just learn as much as possible about how to do my job well. And about 5 years in, I felt pretty comfortable in the role. And I really wanted to participate and give my input and kind of help things more on a national level. And there were some opportunities to do that in terms of volunteering for work groups. Some of the first work groups that I got involved with, and I believe most of the work groups I've been involved with over the last 10 years have been with Jaffar. The first one was to do a survey of program directors. This was back in 2016 or 2017. And I volunteered for the work group and worked on a survey for program directors, really assessing all of our needs and some current issues, and really took things from there. There were several things that I really wanted to get input from our community about in terms of, for example, how we recruit international physicians into our programs and how do we support them in their training and after that, as well as the fellowship timeline. So the process for applying to and matching in fellowships really seemed disorganized and causing a lot of distress for residents. So those were two issues that were really important to me to improve. And so my start of doing that was really by volunteering for those first couple of work groups and getting input from program directors. And then after that, I submitted my name for nomination to be a CNPD officer and was really given an opportunity through those 6 years of being an officer, as well as continued involvement in these work groups, to really put a lot of time and effort into the issues that were important to me and have support from our national organizations. And so that I felt like was really meaningful work for me. And also in terms of networking and working with colleagues and really trying to do service for our residency programs. That was something that during that portion of my time as being a program director really was an amazing experience. So, I've been involved with a lot of other things since then, but that's sort of how I got involved initially.
Harry, you mentioned evolution, I believe, evolution and moving through various activities at a national landscape. And I'll say we started with ACGME, but when I look at my career, actually, my start was with the AAN. And it was through activities at the AAN and successes that I may have had with their committee structure and mission, that propelled me to the ACGME simply by having the AAN nominate me as the future prospect for the ACGME. I will tell you that the ACGME put me again in an environment where I was exposed to other organizations. So I was exposed to the Child Neurology Society. I was exposed to the ABPN. So that evolution and the way things tie together, and each position that you have may lead to someone, as Jeff said, who is ready and is willing to take on further tasks, further activities, and actually to learn a lot more about what we do in education.
Harry, I want to highlight something that I'm thinking as I'm hearing our colleagues talk here, that you mentioned kind of showing up and doing well in these opportunities. And I think it's important to mention that this isn't quite like doing well in medical training or your medical education degree or whatever. It's about energy and passion and bringing an issue that's important to you and being a voice for it. And I heard Erica mention doing that. I heard Jaffar mention doing that. And for me, it was well-being for residents. So I think just kind of the lesson there, I think, for especially junior medical educators is pursue your passion in medical education. Don't try to fit a phenotype. The opportunities will find you if you're out there.
Yeah, thank you for voicing that. I was having that internal reflection. So I'm really glad that you were able to articulate that so well, because I was hearing that from all three of you. And I'm also hearing that it sounds like a lot of people's roads may start at the AAN. I had initially wanted to save the AAN for later because it's kind of a huge organization. But maybe if that is where the road starts, maybe we should just talk about the AAN. So if somebody wants to take a stab at just giving a basic overview of the organization of the various different committees and subcommittees that educators can think about there, and then we can talk about some of the specific initiatives that the Academy of Neurology is doing to help support neurology trainees and medical educators.
So I'll go ahead and start with the Academy. I believe all of us began in the Academy because primarily we're adult neurologists, and primarily the Academy is our largest medical specialty in neurology, the American Academy of Neurology. The committee structure, at least from the education side, there's an overarching education committee with multiple subcommittees. And actually, most of us entered at that subcommittee level. There's a graduate education subcommittee that oversees graduate medical education. There's the undergraduate education subcommittee, which oversees medical student education. In addition, now we have a pipeline committee that has now been absorbed into the two overarching subcommittees of graduate education and undergraduate education. So I think most of us started there. I know, Erica, you did as well. In fact, I was the chair of GES at the time when you joined with others that we've worked with. That role could ultimately lead you in two pathways. One would be as a member of the education committee, the overarching education committee that oversees educational activities, not only in residency programs, not only in undergraduate medical education, but also for the academy itself. Remember, we have a very large annual meeting and with lots of programming, lots of education for trainees, as well as practicing neurologists, as well as neuroscientists, as well as APPs. So the education committee is very broad in its scope and very important in its scope. The other route that I always saw was already mentioned, and that's the Consortium of Neurology Program Directors or the Consortium of Neurology Clerkship Directors. By definition, if you are a clerkship director or a residency director, you're a member of that organization or that consortia. There is an executive leadership. So we do have the chair of the consortium on both sides, undergraduate and graduate medical education. Both Erica and I have held those positions in the past. And that also, again, affords you the opportunity to not only lead, but also to learn about the issues that people face, the program directors face, that the trainees face in regards to their training specific to their programs.
I just wanted to make our listeners aware that, Jaffar, you're currently serving as a vice chair of the Education Committee, and both you and Erica are past chairs of the Program Directors Consortium for those listening in. Erica, what does your involvement in the AAN look like? I know that you've been on several committees and work groups and subcommittees, so
Yeah,
where did it start?
I
Yeah.
think when I last updated my CV, I think I've been involved in 15 or 16 different work groups over the years with the AAN, just a lot of different projects. But most recently, I did serve a 6-year term on the graduate education subcommittee, and that ended 2 or 3 years ago. And since then, I've been involved in several work groups. I'm still actively involved in the work that we do for the fellowship timing. There are 2 other work groups that I've continued to be involved in. It just so happened with the timing of the pandemic that I was incoming as chair of the CNPD in 2020. And because of that, we had to change all of our recruitment for residents and fellows to the virtual environment. And so that was a huge big deal to do that back in 2020 to plan for the 2021 match. So I ended up being the chair of the work group to plan how do we do virtual recruitment in neurology. So that's been the main involvement I've had with the AAN. There have been a couple other work groups that they asked me to help plan a new iteration of the fellowship directories, and so that was something else I worked on this year. But a lot of my volunteer efforts have been actually in other organizations, and that's been very meaningful as well. So I think we'll probably get to some of those later in the podcast.
Yeah. So it sounds like where things started for you were you were involved in the CNPD. You were kind of having your ear to the ground in terms of what people around you are doing that is work that is meaningful to you. And then through then being exposed to what you could get involved with and what you felt like you could participate in and have something to say about, you then took up those opportunities. And so the first place was just being a part of the community and listening to the conversation that's happening and then seeing what people are doing and what's resonated with you.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary of it. Part of it is also just by chance what falls in your lap. So if you're in a leadership position and some issues come up, that's on your plate. So a lot of that was really just because of circumstance too, of what the issues were that were arising when I happened to be in a position where I could do something about that.
Jaffar, you gave us that lovely overview earlier of the structure and organization of the Academy. Did you want to go into some of the opportunities and experiences that you've had there?
So I started out as a member. I think it went back to 2006, a member of GES, the Graduate Education Subcommittee. I started there, I did 6 years, I believe, of a term. The focus of GES at that time was really on more policy, more on global aspects of what the Academy could offer at education meetings like our annual meeting, the Academy's annual meeting, to residents. We oversaw a scholarship program that allowed residents, trainees to come in to the meeting and have at least a $1,000 scholarship or stipend to offset some of the expense to come to a national meeting. Spent my 6 years there and rolled off, but still was invited back for various reasons, for presentations, for discussions of all things impacting GME. and then ultimately was chosen to be chair of GES. And so I spent another 6 years on GES, this time in leadership. That's where I met Erica. I met many others that I still keep in touch with. Again, a secondary outcome of interactions, of being in a group of wonderful people at a national level. By virtue of being the chair of GES, that gives you an ex officio position on the education committee. And so simultaneous or concurrent with my role on GES as the chair, I was also a member of the education committee. So again, puts you in a new environment, learning from new people, interacting with people that you would not have met otherwise. And then subsequent to my 6 years as a member of the education committee, when I rolled off of GES, I rolled into the vice chair position for the education committee. And again, a very broad scope of education, and not just the trainees, but also the membership.
That's a pretty broad survey, and just gives an idea of the scope of like just how heavily involved AAN is across the board in terms of education. I did want to spend the rest of the podcast talking about some of the other organizations that people can find, and some of those opportunities may come again through the AAN, but some other organizations could include the UCNS. Erica, I know you've worked with them, maybe the LCME for some other folks, the AAMC, the ABPN. So maybe Erica, would you mind speaking to UCNS since we did ACGME a little bit ago?
Sure. Well, UCNS is brand new for me. I'm actually going to my first meeting with them in Minneapolis this upcoming week. So they've been great in terms of getting me oriented to being on their accreditation council, but that's a new endeavor for me. I was nominated through the AUPN, which just changed their name to AALN. It's the, I think,
Association of Academic Leaders in Neurology. I was
Academic Leaders in
on the
Neurology
committee that renamed it. Yeah, rebranded it.
We got stuffed owls at the ANA meeting when they did their launch. It was really cute, but they have several nominated positions on the accreditation council. So I applied for one of those positions this past year and was accepted to be on that committee. And that's a committee that does accreditation. It's a bit different than the ACGME. And so I've been learning kind of the differences between the two. I'm learning a lot about all of the different subspecialties that have fellowships that are UCNS accredited. So I'm learning a lot upfront about that, and I'm excited to work with them. The other specialty organization that I've gotten more involved with working with over the past 5 years or so is the ANA, the American Neurological Association. They have a great annual meeting. It's smaller than the AAN national meeting, and it's really focused more on academic neurology. A lot of the talks are more cutting edge science, translational projects, and the program itself is really interesting. I've really enjoyed going to that meeting over the past few years. They have a series of professional development workshops over the course of the meeting. So I was involved as a speaker, as a leader of one of the sessions over a couple of years. And last year, they invited me to be on that committee, the PDW, the Professional Development Workshop Committee. And this upcoming year, I'm serving as vice chair of that committee. So that's been great to get involved with that recently as well.
It sounds like an opportunity to exercise that curriculum development portion of your identity as a medical educator as well.
So one aspect of the UCNS, which is very interesting, is the UCNS is responsible for accreditation and certification, where we don't see that at the ACGME ABPN level, where ACGME oversees accreditation of programs, ABPN oversees certification.
And so what does working with the ABPN look like for you, Jaffar?
So what we just heard from Erica was it greatly exemplifies what we've talked about in the evolution, right? So you're in a position that exposes you to other positions. And if you do what Jeff said, and that is to stand up, stand out, and in a positive way, and be productive and be cordial and be interactive and contribute, then these opportunities seem to kind of roll towards you. So my interaction with the ABPN initially was when I was on the ACGME as a member. So I would see and meet and greet and have conversations with the CEO and president of the ABPN at that time. When I became a chair, I became a representative of the ACGME and attended something called the Crucial Issues Forums. And those crucial issue forums that the ABPN held were just that. Issues in neurology, issues in psychiatry that did deal with certification, but also extended to training programs, to continuing certification, really multiple different topics. And so we would get together as a small group over a weekend and discuss the issues at hand. And this usually would help inform the ABPN on its next steps. Well, that got me involved in some of the committee work with the ABPN, mainly question writing for certification exams and for continuing certification exams. And ultimately, when the AAN, again, was asked to make nominations, which they are one of the main nominators for the board of directors, I was nominated. Now, one thing you got to remember, and hopefully all the listeners will remember this, it takes at least 3 attempts for any position that you want to get and be nominated for. So don't get discouraged when you don't get it the first time. The third time is a charm, and that's been true for most of the positions that I've held, not just with the ABPN, but others.
And to apply our framework, you also got to exercise a different part of your medical educator identity, focusing on assessment and evaluation.
Exactly.
There's the meetings that they put out, but does anybody on the call have experience with the AAMC, the Regional Group on Educational Affairs for your various regions?
I did a stint in the dean's offices. I was an assistant dean for medical education, and it was more or less a unique position because it oversaw not only graduate medical education, but also the medical students in undergraduate medical education at one of our major sites at Emory, and that was Grady Hospital. So at any one given time, I had responsibility, so to speak, of about 500 trainees that would staff that hospital on a daily basis. By virtue of that position, I did attend as a participant and attendee the AAMC meetings and got some insight into that group. Very, very interesting group. I don't know if any of you have attended the meeting, but you learn a lot more about policy from a federal level. You learn a lot more about funding of not only graduate medical education, but also through CMS, VA, and the children's funding sources. But then also you learn about UME and the structure of the medical school systems, the DIOs, all the way down to through the dean's office, down to the faculty that do the hands-on teaching. So it was the meetings were chock full of information that I would not have gotten otherwise, even when attending ACGME or AAN or ANA or any of these organizations. Very unique organization, unique focus. I highly recommend, if you are a medical educator, to seek out opportunities to interact with the AAMC.
Absolutely. I went to my first AAMC meeting this past year in New Jersey, and it was also an interesting year to be there because with all the tumult in federal funding for education and medicine and medical research, there were a lot of conversations, like you were saying, that there's a lot that people are just talking about in terms of federal policy, but definitely a worthwhile meeting to go to. Other organizations that folks wanted to bring in?
Well, I want to underscore the AALN that Erica mentioned, which we're now pronouncing ALN. That was another one that, for me, just kind of came about by accident. I knew Jaffar from the ACGME, and a couple of years ago, he said, "Hey, I have this idea for a panel at what was then the AAPN meeting. Do you want to be on it?" And I said, "Sure." And I sat with Jaffar and a couple other really, people I looked up to in med ed and talked about general neurology education. And then a year later, the AUPN staff, one of the staff contacted me and said, "Hey, do you want to be in our rebranding committee?" And next thing you know, I'm helping create, pick out the owl and fun stuff for what is now ALN. So again, I think it for me, it just underscores the whole point of this. I just wanted to say one other thing, though, that came to mind as I was listening to everybody, and this is maybe a more general closing thought. All of these things that you're hearing us talk about, I think, have defined our careers and advanced them, but I don't think I've ever seen Jaffar or Erica do something to serve themselves and advance their career. That is a secondary outcome of this. And all of these roles are service. It's meeting times, it's travel. My first trip to Chicago for the ACGME was great. It was, I had a per diem and all that. My 25th trip is tiring, right? It's not quite as novel, but it's worth it. And so I think you have to go into it with the mindset of bring ideas, engage in the conversations, have something you care about, but also be doing it for the broader purpose, which is to improve medical education. I've never seen anybody I look up to on these committees doing it to serve themselves. And I think that's probably the most important thing that I've learned from all of this.
Yeah, I think you make a great point about that. For me, really, this has been about meaningful work. There's work that I do in my day-to-day local institution that I find meaningful, but I feel like being on these committees, it is a lot of volunteer time. So volunteering on these committees has been really gratifying and a really important part of my career. And I really encourage people that are thinking about getting more involved. It's something that I think probably helps prevent burnout. It gives you a greater sense of purpose and a greater sense of variety. It also gives you the opportunities to network. I think one of the secondary outcomes, one of the things I'm in this for is really to connect with great people. So, Jaffar's really been a great mentor and friend to me over many years now. And when you're on these committees and you have the opportunity to kind of meet up with people a couple times a year that you really enjoy spending time with, you feel like You are being really productive in terms of the work that you're trying to do together. I find that really gratifying. And so that's sort of what I'm getting out of it personally to some extent. And then really getting to know some of these other organizations, two of the ones we didn't mention. So OPTA, the Organization of Program Director Associations, that's an amazing organization because if you think about it, we have CNPD and that's neurology program directors. There's a meeting of all of the program director associations. So when you're a CNPD officer, you have the opportunity to represent neurology in that group. And so I found that to be really, really interesting as well. And then networking with some of those other training director groups. I'll give one example, which is called ADPERT, that is psychiatry residency training directors. And they have their own conference. So I think a lot of it's been really exciting. I encourage people who are looking for something that they find interesting. If there's a work group looking for volunteers, you don't need to be a leader of an organization. You don't need to be like Jaffar. You don't need to be the chair of the RC. You don't need to be the vice chair of the education committee for the AAN. You can be doing really meaningful work in terms of just joining a work group and helping with a specific project or developing a specific curriculum along with a group of other people. And that in itself can be something that's really exciting. It may or may not lead to a leadership position. It really doesn't have to. But I think if you're picking a project that seems like something that you would like to work on, it's really, really beneficial both for, on a national level to develop something that everybody can use, as well as to make those connections and work on your own professional career development.
So in my closing, I want to link together two things. Jeff, you mentioned the amount of work that you have to do as part of these positions, and you're absolutely correct. And Erica, you mentioned burnout. I was at the Leadership Development Committee when Terry Casino was the chair. And Terry, who you know, was one of the major investigators for burnout among neurologists with Tate Shannenfeld from Mayo at the time. Terry said, Jaffar will never be burned out. Why in the world did he say that? And he said it for both of the reasons that you brought up. One is the amount of work, and the second is the diversity of activities that you're involved in your career. And I think this is a very important point. Myself, as a person, if I was to do the same one thing every day, 5 to 7 times a week, 52 weeks a year, 30 years into a career, I probably would have been burned out. But because I've been active, doing many different activities, learning different things, meeting new people, both locally in my own institution and nationally with all of you, watching you grow, watching my mentors watch me grow, that has led to a really, really exciting, enthusiastic position that I'm in as far as my career. And so I do think it's very helpful to stay active, get your fingers in a bunch of different things, and then decide what it is you want to do and then pursue those. I think it's an important message to get out.
Absolutely. Thank you all for sharing your reflections and perspectives. What I'm hearing from each of you is look and see what people are doing that speaks to you and that you think you have something to offer. If it leads to other opportunities or promotion, great. If it leads to change, even better. So with that, thank you to our listeners for tuning in, and thank you to our guests. We've been speaking with Jaffar Khan, Erica Schuyler, and Jeff Dewey. Thank you for taking the time to share your experiences, each one of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Neurology Nuts and Bolts podcast was created and produced by Sarah Schaefer. It is not recorded as an official podcast of any institution or organization. The podcast is unfunded. Opinions are those of the individual participants. Music by Audrey Naff. Artwork by Shivani Ghoshal. Want more content like this? Be sure to subscribe to the Neurology Nuts and Bolts podcast wherever you get your podcasts to hear more about constructing your career in neurology. Follow us on Twitter/X at Neurobolts and on Facebook at Neurology Nuts and Bolts to stay up to date on new content and give us feedback on what you want to hear. And be sure to tell your friends. Thanks for joining us.